and I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Hrabe from VRC Metal Systems is going to be talking about cold spray transition.
So just one while Rob is getting his audio set.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened there.
No problem.
It dropped me off when I got up to Adobe Connect. Can you see my presentation?
We have your presentation on the screen. You'll just tell me when you want to click through, and I'll switch slides for you.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Okay, I'm just going to talk about a couple of things. First of all, common problems that we've seen in insulation over the last several years, as well as some of the infrastructure development things that some of the other speakers have talked about and are kind of concerned about moving forward. Next slide, please. This upfront, this brief isn't really intended to throw anyone under the bus or talk about any shortcomings of any specific installation, but there's kind of 4 key stumbling blocks that kind of we've seen over and over, and so the intent here is just to identify those to smooth them out. Next slide, please. We're all about making you successful with your implementation of cold spray. One of the keys to success from our perspective is really defining the desired outcomes up front. A lot of times there's competing metrics that it's really difficult with cold spray to have a single machine or single setup that satisfies a wide range of requirements. If you do that, it'll typically cost you a lot of money and may not work for the applications you want anyway. This is usually not necessarily associated with the cold spray system itself. It may be more associated with infrastructure. For example, a turntable, you can get one that'll turn a really big part really slowly, or you can get one that'll turn a small part really fast, but if you do something in the middle, you can probably do neither. And same thing with cash flow. If cash flow is critical to your operation, it may not be in DoD, but for some of the commercial entities, getting your process development up front is key to success. Next slide, please. With that, a lot of people have talked about collaboration, particularly when it comes down to process development and qualification. This came up in the road mapping exercise that Rob Carter briefed earlier quite a bit. And it depends largely on your objectives. If you're an R&D versus production, or what your intent is. But doing this work up front is really worth the money. We've seen a tendency towards people trying to go it alone, and certainly you can do that, but in terms of time and money spent, we've seen over and over again that you're way better off partnering up with one or more of the entities, some of which you see here, that have a lot of experience, particularly in the more complicated applications. It's way worth the money and in terms of the time you'll spend as well. A lot of times it looks easy to implement cold spray, but a lot of times there are geometries or material or qualification, other things that we've run into in the past that you'll spend a lot of time trying to get around. And it's a whole lot easier just to partner with a more experienced entity to begin with. Qualification's another example. SAFE has a lot of experience in aerospace, particularly with testing and a lot of the things that they've run into in terms of testing cold spray. that you can get around. Of course, you can do it yourself, but in general, we've seen it takes longer. Next slide, please. Environmental health and safety is a tough one, and why that is mainly because there's a lot of local entities involved, a lot of local authorities, state level, county level, even city level, and the way that they interpret these regulations, really aren't necessarily under our control. And you also have a lot of corporate EH&S folks, which, can add some complexity in resolving environmental or safety concerns. We've seen delays up to a year, sometimes 2 years or more to resolve some of these issues. Suffice to say, getting started earlier to try and figure these out really before you buy a machine, and it sounds kind of silly for a company that's selling machines to tell you to delay buying a machine, but the reality is you'll save a lot of effort, a lot of time and trouble and heartache if you work on these environmental health and safety things up front. There is an effort underway with ARL and Jensen Hughes and AQuest and some others to set up guidelines for cold spray booth design, DHAs, fire protection, et cetera, similar to what the thermal spray industry has done in the past. And this should give us some better guidance to local authorities, which hopefully will overcome some of these problems. Solvus has done some work on powder flammability and hazard classification for some powders, which can be made available as well. Point is that this really needs to be addressed. Next slide, please. Talked a little bit about education training earlier, a lot of that. We are offering training as well, in-house here as well as on-site training, or both. And we'll continue to do that, but like welding, I can train you to weld in 1 day, but to train you to weld upside down, fillet weld underwater, might take a couple years. And it's similar in cold spray that, I can teach you to run the machine in a day. But if you want to develop your own applications and with different materials, different geometries, those kind of things, it might take a couple years to fully understand all the nuances. And as Isaac's presentation pointed out, there's a lot to it, even when you look at things like robotics and things like that. We do offer on-site support for a couple of years, which can help you get processes in place and people trained in an easier fashion. But having a workforce development plan is really important. Next slide, please. So we've talked about some of the problems, so I'll move on to some of the operational considerations like supply chain and infrastructure that we've talked about here a little bit today. Next slide, please. Supply chain, we've heard already quite a bit about supply chain, but like the other areas that we've talked about, it really comes down to building the right team for powder, engineering services, gas supply, automation, robotics, and fee-for-service. A lot of these industries or services are available to a degree, but not necessarily specifically for cold spray. So there's a lot of nuances associated with cold spray depositions where you really got to have the right people on the team in terms of your supply chain. Hang on. So we'll hear some more of that, I think, later today. But even things like the quantum developed helium recovery system, if ROI is key to your operation, that all needs to be part of your supply chain. We're trying to reduce costs as much as we can with things like helium recovery, as well as operational considerations that'll make your system more efficient. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier, it's often more cost-effective to get your processes developed up front before you buy a system, before you try to tackle some of the equipment and facility things. To facilitate that, we've expanded into a 55,000 square foot facility that's specifically renovated and designed for cold spray. It's got 3 booths in it right now with helium recovery and capability to house up to 12 booths, 12 additional booths, and as well as automation, high bay manufacturing, even limited production support. Next slide, please. And then we have a couple of facilities that are for R&D in Webster, Massachusetts, and Costas Research Institute at Northeastern Campus in Burlington. So those can all be used to do that development up front. Next slide, please. This is the infrastructure as it currently is laid out with VRC equipment. Next slide. And you'll have to click it a couple times or click it again. Okay. We're taking a regional approach. We've partnered with Phillips Federal to provide support to regionally. In some cases, it's on-site support at a customer's facility. At others, it's an actual dedicated facility that's dedicated to a specific set of customers. Next slide, please. And these will come back, and this will also come with reach back support that will allow you to reach back for those more difficult problems, process development, recipe development, new materials development, those kind of things. Those regional support entities will be able to reach back and get that support as needed. Next slide, please. Fred mentioned this Brolga system. We partnered with RUAG to produce those Brolgas, and what this will do is give us capability to do field or on-site support. That, along with the Dragonfly and the Raptor portable systems. So with this capability, you won't actually have to necessarily buy your own cold spray system. If you only have one application that needs to be repaired, we can bring this system in, set it up, do your repair application on site, and then go away, so that you can have a kind of an on-call capability, particularly for things like power plants or refineries or other places like that where you may need, just some limited support on site. Next slide.
Hey, Rob, we've got just a minute left, so if we're jumping through here, we can get to at the end.
Yep, this is the last slide. I was just going to point out if there's things that I didn't mention in the brief. There is a blue button on our website. You go to vrcmetalsystems.com. You can go in there and point to any capabilities you think that need to be developed that I haven't mentioned. So that's all I got. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rob. There's a question that came in. Does VRC have plans to expand into Europe and Asia?
Yes. So we partnered with RUAG for distribution of the Brolga system, and we do have a sales office in Singapore, and we're installing a system in Japan, and we do intend to expand out in that region.
And one other question was on the commercial end, what is the largest application area on the commercial end? Is it aerospace or is it something else?
Aerospace is certainly the most prevalent, mainly because of the cost of the parts. The cost of the cold spray, it's not in a lot of cases that big of a factor. But we're also getting into a lot of oil and gas, pressure vessels, a lot of general heavy industrial type, even ag. We've had some applications there as well. And then the nuclear power industry is really, Department of Energy is really has moved a long ways over the last couple of years.
Very good. Appreciate it, Rob. Thank you. Our next speaker is